The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Kim Kiyosaki, the author, entrepreneur, and real estate investor. You are the co-founder and CEO of the Rich Dad Company, and alongside your husband, Robert, have dedicated the last 30 years of your life to providing financial education to millions of people around the world. Your investing career began in 1989 with a small rental house in Oregon, and today you own thousands of properties, including hotels, golf courses, and commercial units. You wrote the best-selling book, Rich Woman, with the goal of helping women everywhere create true independence by taking control of their financial future. You ultimately believe there remains a huge void when it comes to financial education, and your goal is to help as many people as possible understand how to take action and create long-lasting wealth. Kim, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you, Brian. I love being on your show. I love talking with you. It's always an adventure.
Kim, it's great to have you back. I think last time you were here was about 4 years ago, but we've hung out in many places. I know you've had, dinner with the whole crew in Phoenix and in London, and it's always a great time hanging out with you and obviously Robert and like kind of the whole crew. So great to have you on. And, your stuff always cuts through, Kim. And, you have a different frequency, but your message, sometimes you need different frequencies to get a message to the right people. And so I'm so glad you're here. And again, you've lived your philosophy for the last 30 years. As a quick aside, I've been tagging you and Robert lately on my Instagram because I have Cash Flow for Kids right here in my studio.
Oh, thanks.
It's on our conference room table. And my two sons, they're 6 and 7 years old. We play every Sunday Cash Flow for Kids. And so
thank you for doing that. I love that.
They keep saying, when do we win? When do we win? And for me, when Damon's 5, he's almost 6, and he's got this sheet in front of him that says, his income statement, and they're talking about passive income. And so for me, every time they roll the dice, I'm winning as a parent.
Yes.
Because these young boys are getting in their heads, thanks to you and Robert and building this amazing game, that it's all about acquiring assets that cash flow as opposed to being in this rat race where we're waiting for a salary. And so, I played Monopoly when I was a kid, but this is like Monopoly on steroids because they're getting these subliminal messages. So I'm going to keep tagging you on that. But if anybody's curious.
I love that you're teaching your kids that. I would, more and more parents are starting to realize how important that is. And just changing the mindset, because that's really what the cash flow game does and the Cash Flow for Kids. It just changes your mindset because people are taught to work hard for money, and we work really, really hard for money, but we're never taught what to do with our money. So thank you for kind of changing that mindset of your kids. And I know they're going to, I know being your kids, they're going to be phenomenal as adults. So
I hope so. I hope so, because I started them off paying them an allowance to do chores. And then I realized I'm actually incentivizing them the wrong way, right? That's that's a paycheck. And so, now I'm trying to get them back on track. But maybe we start there, Kim, because you've always said couples should play the cash flow game.
Yes.
You and Robert, people don't know, you and Robert created the cash flow game before the Rich Dad book. And ultimately, I think it was your way of trying to re-educate everybody from a financial perspective. But what was the philosophy of that game? Because it's a lot of what you're about.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that the game came first. So we created the cash flow game. The book came as a result of Robert working on a brochure to promote the game. That's how that came about. But the cash flow game came about because Robert and I, in 1994, we were financially free. And everybody thought, well, you must have had millions of dollars, or you sold your business for a lot of money, or big stock portfolios. And it's like, no, we didn't have any of that. Just as you're saying, Brian, it was our assets. And an asset in the rich dad world is something that puts money in your pocket, whether you work or not. So what we had was we had $10,000 a month, every month coming in from our investments, primarily real estate. But our living expenses at the time were only $3,000. So at that point, we were financially free. And instead of traveling the world, everybody's like, how did you do it? How did you do it? We actually took step by step. And this was interesting, how to put what we did into a game that was fun and entertaining. And we kind of trick people into learning because they're having fun. So what we did is we actually took the steps that we took to become financially free, and we put it in the game. So the financial statement, which is the scorecard in the game, actually is a type of financial statement that we look at every month. And you've got in the game, you've got the income statement, you've got the balance sheet, and you've got the statement of cash flow. So we wanted people to teach people. So instead of us traveling all over the world, the game travels all over the world to places that Robert and I would never, ever get to. And then people can teach one another. People can teach their kids. We have it in businesses. I had somebody who played the game with 3 accountant applicants for their business to see what the behavior was, because it really is a mindset change, and it's you watch people's behavior and it really comes to the surface. So it's my passion. It's I like to be the queen of cash flow. And I love that this game, we're now going to have a digital version that we're about to launch, which is very, very exciting. But the more people out there get access to this game, I think financial literacy is the number one thing that if people could understand financial literacy, I think it's at the root of so many of people's problems, that the lack of financial literacy. So the more financially literate, the less dependent we become on government, the less dependent we become on bosses, the more control we have over our lives. And I'm all about taking control of the financial life.
Yeah, well, let's go a bit deeper on that. There's a great quote from you where you said entrepreneurship regrows your brain from the damage that school has done. Why aren't we financially literate? It's a question I always ask. And, a couple of years ago, we went heavy into the blockchain space. And when you play around with Bitcoin for a while, you start looking at the fiat currency system, askance a little bit. And then you start asking these questions like, well, how come we weren't taught about money? And then obviously, things that Robert has said so many times, schools teach you to be poor, things that you echo. But why weren't we taught financial education? Why are we still not taught financial education?
That's a great question, Brian. We have hit our head against the wall trying to bring the games and books into the school system. All we get is we don't teach money in school. It's like it's an evil subject, which I do not understand, because it's something everybody uses every day in their life. It's the number one life skill. Yet people don't know. We work so hard for our money, but then nobody teaches us what to do with our money. So maybe it's on purpose. Maybe they don't want us to know about money. I don't know. When we created the cash flow game, Brian, one of the first things I did is I sent it. I had a contact at Harvard, and she was a professor there. So I sent it to her and I said, play this game, see what you think, and I'll call you in a couple of weeks. So I call her in a couple of weeks and I said, have you played the game? She goes, this is Harvard, Kim. We don't play games at Harvard. And besides, we don't, sorry. Hang on. Yikes. Sorry. So she said, Kim, we don't play games at Harvard, and we don't teach about money. It's below them. It was like below them. So I really don't know today. More and more schools are starting to bring, but not really the public school system. I see it in charter schools. I see it in homeschooling. I see it in individuals, teachers, parents who will bring financial education into the school. But I think it could just be on purpose that the powers that be do not want people financially literate, because then they would have more control over their life. And maybe there's forces that don't want that to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, let's go a little bit deeper on that, because there's people that also start to criticize when the government starts sending people checks And,
Yes.
you did a great interview with PragerU, and they were dropping clips of you recently where I think you were saying, we got to stop conditioning people to expect or get used to getting that check, that unemployment check, that COVID check, that whatever check, because it conditions them, I guess, to be ultimately helpless.
Yes.
Some people say that all these social programs, they look like you're helping people, but other groups zoom out and they say, actually, you're doing the opposite to these people. You're conditioning them to be dependent on the state. Then their behaviors have to kind of align with the state.
Correct.
And sooner or later, you're actually incentivizing families not to stay together. You're incentivizing people not to work. And you've almost created these anti-humans just to get that check. I don't know. I'm curious for your thoughts on all that.
Oh, I've got big thoughts on that. I think one of the worst things you can do is give people money. One of the most important things is what it does to your soul, to your spirit, to your self-esteem. What makes countries great is production. What makes people great is getting out there and producing, coming up against obstacles and having breakthroughs and all of this. I think it's just keeping people very, very dependent on the government. And of course, if you give people money, there is a price to pay. And that price is your freedom. That price is control over your own life, control over your own body even. And now they're coming out with UBI, Universal Basic Income. They're experimenting with that in the US where everybody gets a check. I mean, I think it's the worst thing you can do. I am a huge, huge proponent of capitalism, free markets, free trade. I think that's what keeps the world running, not just giving people money, printing more money, giving people checks, stimmy checks. Oh, my goodness. So many people right now in the US are not working. I don't know how they afford it, but I know for a fact people who had been on welfare for a short period of time because they had a something that, years ago they had a situation and they weren't working and they needed money. They said to me, it was the worst feeling ever going into that office and picking up a check without earning it. I mean, I think people in general, they want to be of contribution. They want to earn what they get. They need to be in exchange. And with stimmy checks and free money and all UBI, it's just one big out of exchange for me. And I'm more concerned about what it does to a person's soul and spirit and what that price that they're paying for that check. They probably have no idea, but I would never, ever, ever pay that price ever.
Yeah, that killing the soul is a really important to dwell on. There's a movie that just came out recently. It's called The Great Awakening. It was the Plandemic 3 movie from Mickey Willis, and his first movie talked a little bit about viruses and things like that. The second one talked about paper trails to Wuhan, and the third one he really went head on with communism, and he talked about communism versus capitalism, and if you go down that route, what it leads to, how it's kind of infecting the U.S. I mean, Kim, my daughter's at BU now, and she came back recently, and she's like, there are actually students that think communism is better there. And I was like, they're actually believing that? She's like, yeah. And if you go down that route, and this movie takes people down that route, it's all dark. And there's always someone out there that say, yeah, but this time socialism is going to be different.
It's going to be different.
Yeah.
It never works. It never works. It's very scary because I see the same signs, Brian. I see it here in the US. The way they're leading people to schools, the universities and colleges, and now it's going into high schools. They are not institutions of learning. They're institutions of indoctrination. They're indoctrinating these students to start believing that, yeah, socialism and communism is great because everybody's equal. The world isn't equal. It doesn't work that way. And just the other day, we did an event at Arizona State University, and it was Robert, Dennis Prager, and Charlie Kirk of Turning Point. And the subject was health, wealth, and happiness. Very non-controversial. It was just an educational event. It was the professors that stood up and said, we don't want Charlie Kirk and Dennis Prager. They're Marxists. They're KKK. They're racist. And they used all this language, and they got the students kind of revved up. And now what the good news is, we did the event. We put a press release out because this was getting so much attention. It was just a simple event, and they've turned it into a political event, which it was not. But as a result, this has now opened the door. Some of the people that were involved have been doing major interviews on major networks. It's become a kind of a test for free speech. And the whole narrative right now, people are using Arizona State and our event as a platform for free speech. And if that was the effect of that event, then I am thrilled, because we're getting knocked out of free speech right, left, and center. You know it on social media. We've experienced it on social media. It's once you have no free speech, you have no community. You have no, what's the word?
Yeah, you have no life.
You have no life. You have no freedom, that's for sure, because it's all propaganda then at that point.
And so you are making some progress with this event. Like, you were able to do it, and it's become a lightning rod, and it's not just getting buried like so many other events did at universities in the last couple of years. So it seems to be making some progress.
Yes, two of the women that were key people involved from ASU, one was an ASU professor. She was the one that was putting it on, as well as her coworker. They both got fired.
Wow.
And because of bringing Charlie Kirk and Dennis Prager and Robert onto their campus. So she has now been speaking out, and the networks are all picking her up, and a lot of media is picking her up nationwide right now. So it's a really positive thing. I think what we need to do, Brian, is people just have to start standing up. They have to start saying no, and a lot of times that comes from saying no with your wallet, and not well, for me, not patronizing the institutions that are very, very, I'll use the word woke, very, very kind of anti the values that we stand for in capitalism and free markets and free trade, against liberties and freedom. We just have to stand up and say, we're not going down that route.
Yeah, and there's been some great boycotts of some companies out there where people finally have pushed back and say enough is enough. It's nice to see it kind of turning, because from 2020 to 2021, it looked like it was only going one way. Yes. And you made reference, I mean, we were having everything taken off of YouTube, and I was quite literally shocked. You know, I'd spent 9 years putting anything I wanted on YouTube, and all of a sudden, you know, one conversation was deemed violating guidelines, and then the next one, and then the next one. And, you know, when you start taking away people's freedom of speech, everything breaks down.
Yes.
And we all suffer from it. Like we even saw after all the pandemic, if we had actually listened to some of these ideas, we would have saved lives, we would have made progress. And that's always the case. And so it's interesting, Kim, that you bring that up, because, you know, ownership of property and ownership of your freedom of speech are linked. They are hand in hand. Yes. And so if people want to start talking about not owning property, about going to where the state owns things, pretty soon your free speech will be gone, and there won't be much you can do about it. Pretty soon then Big Brother comes next, and all of a sudden you're back to some of these very dystopian states that we've seen in the past and we see in the movies. We are already living partial versions of those now. People need to really understand.
Isn't communism one of the or Marxism one of the key components? The abolition of private the abolition of private property, and I see that happening. I mean, taxes are going up right now. People aren't being able to necessarily afford when the interest rates go up and their mortgage gets refinanced. They can't afford it. People are leaving their homes. So I see that happening, and it looks very subtle, but I'm not so sure. The banking crisis here is far from over. I think there's a plan in place for the banking crisis, which is not a healthy thing. Small banks are just getting squeezed out right and left. So we gotta keep the fight going.
Yeah, I want to go deep and get your thoughts on what's happening with banking right now. And that concept of private property. You know, we went into the blockchain space, Kim, and there's an incredible guy named Yat Su. He runs a company called Animoca Brands out of Hong Kong. They have about $4 billion in assets. They have a lot of gaming companies and metaverse, and he's a huge proponent, Kim, of digital property rights. Now, a lot of times we don't think about digital property rights. We think about owning our house, owning assets they can't take away from us, by the way, which isn't your dollar necessarily. Now he comes in and he says your digital property rights are just as important. And if you can't own things like your medical data, your browsing history, your identity, your digital property online, then guess what happens? You start to lose your freedoms as well.
Yes. Yes.
And again, I lived that because for YouTube had, 2 million of my subscribers, 9,000 of my videos, 9 years of my life, and I didn't own it. They owned it. So guess what? They could take away my right to digital freedom of speech. So like this is all tied, and people need to understand.
Yes.
And so now with Web3 and the blockchain, I can actually own these assets forever, and they can be on a blockchain where no company, Web2 company, can take them away from me, which means they can't censor me. So I would say to everybody, all of this is related. And if you talk to the hardcore Bitcoiners, they love it because you can't take away an asset. You can't print more of it and dilute it. And that gives them a freedom, potentially even to speak more, because now their currency isn't being controlled. And
that's interesting because just one other thing is when we look at the assets that we want to own today, we want to own assets that the government can't print, right? Yeah. The dollar is, where is that? We want tangible things that we can touch, feel, that are real, not fake. Stock market to me is kind of fake. It's all manipulated. The dollar's worthless, going to be worthless pretty soon. There's a lot of interesting things coming up right now.
Well, I want to get your thoughts on those assets. Just before we do, I just want to linger on a point that you mentioned earlier when you talked about UBI. You and Robert have always said that a paycheck is something close to a drug habit. It's as bad as a drug habit. And I had a drug habit for years, and I talked about it publicly in one of my movies. And it's a very dangerous thing that's hard to get out from under. You tell most people that, they would say, "Oh, that's a bit harsh. This is just the way I get paid." But if a salary is a drug habit, then what is a COVID check? And then what is UBI? You go from a gateway drug to like the most dangerous drug on the planet. Fentanyl is like UBI because, if a paycheck, you have to do some work. A COVID stimulus check is every now and then. A UBI is you wake up and you get it.
For nothing. You get it for nothing. Yep.
Yeah, for nothing. So everything about you is ultimately controlled. Yes. You don't own any assets, so you won't have control. And pretty soon, consciously or subconsciously, you are doing whatever the person that wrote you the check tells you to do. And that's why you say it steals your soul.
It's yes. I mean, it's like, who owns the gold makes the rules. And, I teach women about money and investing. One of the things I see is if the husband is the one making the money, and she is not, then she oftentimes gets resentful because she doesn't want to have to ask for money. She doesn't want to ask permission, but it's the same concept. It's that whoever has, and I see money enslave a lot of people, not just women, but when you talk about a paycheck kind of enslaves you to your boss and to that job. I remember the day when we talk about the income statement and the balance sheet. So the income statement, you have your income and your expenses, and the job salary is always in the income column. And then you have your assets and liabilities on your balance sheet. I remember the day when I was always taught to focus on income, get a good paying job, get a raise, work hourly rates and work more hours or raise your hourly rate. It was always about income, income, income. And the lights finally went on after I had been doing a little bit of real estate investing and I had cash flow from my assets. The light finally went on that I was focused on the wrong column. I was focused on acquiring income when I should have been focused on acquiring assets.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.